holidays, y'all, and welcome back to my kitchen. Now, I don't know about you, but the holidays are always a time of great tradition for me. And on New Year's Day, it is a tradition in my family to eat black-eyed peas. So today I'm going to show you how to make my black-eyed pea recipe, which is really versatile, and I'll show you how you can mix it up if you want to. And then I'm sharing with you my family's cornbread recipe. Let's go ahead and get started with making our black-eyed peas. I have a Dutch oven pan over a medium burner, so it is nice and warm, and we're going to go ahead and add in some bacon. So we're going to use the bacon as the fat for sauteing the vegetables that will go in with the peas. But first we'll just render that bacon down a little bit. We're cooking it over medium heat instead of high heat, so instead of browning the bacon, it's just rendering the fat and pulling it out, and then the bacon will cook with the black-eyed peas and the liquid. So we'll just go ahead and saute this down just a little bit. Usually it takes about 5 minutes or so for it to get started and to start to see some of that fat ooze out. And then we're going to add in some onion and celery. Now, I like to have a really traditional black-eyed pea recipe with not a huge pop of spicy flavor. You can add jalapenos in here if you wanted to make a little bit of a spicier blend, or you can add some Cajun spices to make a Cajun black-eyed pea recipe. Black-eyed peas are traditionally very southern, so you'll definitely see them in Cajun cuisine. But I like to keep it pretty basic with just a little pop of flavor with some cayenne pepper. I know cayenne pepper is normally hot, but it's just going to be a little tiny bite to the black-eyed peas. So I can start to hear this bacon sizzling just a little bit. We'll let this go for about 5 minutes. The fat in the bacon has rendered out just a little bit, so you can see fat along the bottom of the pan. The bacon is not browning. You don't want crunchy bacon in your black-eyed peas. It is going to be a soft bacon. If you're vegan and you want to follow this recipe, or you don't eat pork, then you can use any kind of oil instead and go straight to sauteing the onion and celery. But I'm a southern girl and we eat bacon with everything, so we have rendered the fat out of the bacon a little bit, and now we're going to add in some celery, and this just gives a good clean taste. And then we're going to add onion. And of course, that's a huge flavor booster in any dish. And we are going to saute this in the rendered bacon fat until the onion is translucent, and has softened. So it won't be caramelized, it won't be completely cooked through, but it'll start to be a little bit more translucent. So this will take about 5 to 7 minutes over medium to low heat. Again, you're not browning anything, you're just softening the ingredients in the pot. The onions have cooked down just a little bit. They're translucent. They're not as bright white as they used to be when they went in raw. And now we're going to go ahead and add some minced garlic to the pot. And we'll stir it around just until we smell it. We don't want it to burn on the bottom of the pan or cook at all. It's just going to be an aromatic that will cook into the liquid. That'll take about 30 seconds. And then I'm going to add the cayenne pepper. Again, this is just a tiny bite to the beans. You barely will taste any spice. But I'm going to add in a pinch of the cayenne pepper before we add the liquid. That's a watered down way of blooming the seasoning so you can get the flavor of the cayenne before we add the liquid. Now it's just a pinch. You can add as much as you like. Of course, this can be customized really easily. And then we're going to add 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. Give it a quick stir. And then I'm going to add 1 pound of black-eyed peas. And they've been rinsed and sorted through for any kind of rocks or stones that might be in there. That is a common thing with beans. I hate to break it to you, but a black-eyed pea is not a pea, it's an actual bean. And I'm using dry beans because these cook really fast. So I know a lot of people soak their beans overnight to have a quick cooking bean. But black-eyed peas you can cook in an hour, so I just like to go ahead and use the dried kind. And then I'm going to fill the container or the pot with water until it covers the beans by about 2 inches. And then you can always add more water towards the end. So the beans are covered, and now well, let's start at 1 inch. And then we'll add more water if we need to. You might have noticed that I haven't added salt yet. So usually you salt the food early on in cooking, but I'm not adding any salt to when I cook beans because it hardens the shell of the bean and keeps it from opening up and hydrating. So if you've ever cooked beans for hours and you felt like they never fully hydrated, or they were still tough, or it just plain took several hours, then you likely added salt to the water before they've actually even cooked, and that keeps the bean from opening up and absorbing that water. So always salt your beans at the end. That's a little tip from me to you on how to cook beans the best way. So we're going to bring this up to a boil very quickly and then reduce it down to a simmer. And like I said, it's going to cook for about an hour. And I just like to give it a stir every once in a while, make sure it's not rapidly boiling too much and it does stay at a simmer. And then if I need to add more water, I can. The end result is going to be a soft, tender bean. You kind of want it a little past what pasta would be at al dente. So it is soft, but it has a little bit of a bite. It's not too mushy. They're not broken. The beans aren't broken up in the pot. They still hold their shape. And then you'll have a little bit of a liquid or a gravy in the pan. And as a Southerner, we call that pot liquor. And that is going to be like the gravy that you use with your beans. And I like to put it over my cornbread or mix the cornbread in. So we're gonna let this simmer for about 45 minutes. And at the 45-minute mark, I'm gonna show you how to make my family's cornbread recipe. The beans have been simmering for about 35 to 40 minutes. I did go ahead and add an extra cup of water because they were starting to get a little, it was starting to get a little low on water, meaning the tops were exposed. I still want a little bit of liquid at this stage on top, so I added an extra cup. And now it's time to get started on my family's cornbread recipe. So here's the deal in my family. We like a crunchy crust cornbread. So we like to add a lot of shortening to the hot cast iron pan, cook the cornbread in there, and then flip it over at the end so both sides get a nice crunchy crust to the fluffy cornbread that's on the inside. So I'm gonna share my family recipe with you today. The first thing that we do is that we take a cold 8 to 10 inch cast iron pan. I'm using a 10-inch one today. If you want a little bit of a taller loaf, then you can use an 8-inch cast iron pan. And the key is to make sure it's as seasoned as possible. Now I'm still in the seasoning phase of this cast iron pan, so I'm going to add a little bit of extra shortening to make sure that it doesn't stick so we can have an easy flip over. But with cast iron that's still being seasoned, you never know until it actually is game time. So we're just gonna put a little bit of extra shortening in today to try to prevent that stick on the bottom of the pan. I've got about 2.5 to 3 tablespoons of shortening. And I'm going to put this into a cold oven and then turn it to 450 degrees. And the shortening will melt as the pan heats up in the oven. And once it gets to 450 degrees, then we'll pour in the cornbread. So let's go put this in the oven and then we'll start mixing our ingredients. Now we'll start making our cornbread. I have 2 cups of cornbread mix. So this is like it's a self-rising cornbread mix. We like to use Martha White in my family. But it already has the baking soda and salt and flour and cornmeal mixed together. So that's a shortcut step that we take all the way back to my great-grandparents. So I have the cornmeal here, and then I add a tablespoon of sugar. We don't like a really sweet cornbread when we are eating it with beans, so we don't add any extra sugar. If you do like a sweet cornbread, you can definitely add more sugar or you can add honey. So we will whisk that together. And then separately, I'm going to add buttermilk and an egg. And we will whisk that together. So I have 2 cups of buttermilk and 1 egg. And we will combine those. And then next we are going to fold in the wet ingredients into the dry ingredients. We don't want to create a lot of gluten development when mixing the wet and dry ingredients, so instead of whisking vigorously, we're just going to fold it together like we would cookies or a cake that we want to have a nice tender interior. So we will slowly pour in the buttermilk egg mixture into the sugar cornmeal mixture. And then we'll just fold this in by moving the spatula around the edges of the bowl and then slicing through the center. Kind of similar to when I make my chocolate chip cookies. It's the same technique I use. And we want to make it to where it's not super lumpy. It's definitely liquidy, kind of like a pancake batter is what we're going after. Just be real careful with how we're mixing it. I'm actually gonna turn my beans down a little bit because it looks like it's gone from a simmer to a boil. And I wanna make sure I don't have any dried lumps on the bottom. And this is the exact consistency that we are looking for. We'll let this sit here until the cast iron is finished preheating. Then we'll take that hot pan out of the oven, add a little bit of that shortening into this mix, give it a good stir, and then pour the batter into the cast iron and put it into the oven and cook it for about 20 minutes. So let's just let this rest for a few minutes until the cast iron is ready. The cast iron has come to 450 degrees in the preheated oven, and this is where we're going to move quick. So we want to take some of the shortening and pour it into the mix, probably about 1.5 tablespoons, and then leave the rest of the shortening in the pan, and that's what's going to fry the cornbread as it's cooking. So we're just going to quickly mix this together. We don't want to lose the heat from the cast iron, that's why this is a little bit of a speed game. And now that we have that hot shortening in the mix, we will pour it into our cast iron pan. You can hear the sizzle. That's exactly what we want. It's cooking those edges. It's just going to give a nice crispy cornbread. And then just make sure that the cornbread's evenly spread. And now we will put this back into the 450 degree oven and bake it for 20 minutes. The cornbread is cooking in the oven and the black-eyed peas are almost ready. I'm going to give it a little bit of a taste test just to make sure that they're done. If not, we might add a little bit of liquid because you can start to see the beans on top. Remember, we're making a pot liquor with the rest of the juice from the beans. So at this stage, we don't want a lot of liquid because then it's gonna leave a really runny kind of gravy, and we really want it to be a little bit thicker. So I'll just give it a taste test. The beans aren't really breaking open, so that's good. That means they're not overcooked. This is really hot, so just be careful. I think the beans are actually there, so I'm going to turn the heat off and I'm going to stir in my salt at this point. I have 2 teaspoons of salt. That's a lot of salt, but the beans need it at this point to bring out the flavor of everything. The bacon adds a little bit, but not enough to salt the dish. So I've put in 2 teaspoons. And then I'm going to pour in a teaspoon of white wine vinegar. Now vinegar is kind of like salt in that it brings out all the flavors in the recipe. So anytime you add vinegar or you feel like the dish is missing just a little bit of something, add a splash of vinegar. It doesn't take a lot. We only just used a teaspoon for a pound of beans. And you'll notice it really starts to bring out the flavor in dishes when it just needs a little something extra. And that was a white wine vinegar. Give this a good stir, and then we'll do another taste test to see if we need to add any more salt. Again, it's still really hot. It's perfect. We'll let this cool while we're making the rest of the cornbread. It's still baking for about 15 more minutes, and then we'll cut it open, pour the beans on top, and have a really cozy New Year's Day dinner. Okay, we're getting ready to work really quickly because the cornbread is almost finished baking at the 20-minute mark. I'm going to take the cornbread out, bring it over here, flip it really fast, and put it back into the oven for about 5 more minutes. So let's go grab that cornbread from the oven. All right, it's out of the oven, so we're gonna give it a quick run around with the knife. And then we will quickly toss this over without breaking it, hopefully. And now it is going to bake for another 5 minutes to get that other side nice and crispy. The cornbread is finished cooking, and now it's time to assemble the dish. So I have the hot cornbread out. I'm going to cut it into wedges. You can hear the crispiness of the crust of the cornbread. That's how you know it's real good. We'll just cut a wedge, and what I like to do is take a wedge of cornbread that's super hot. It's still so crispy. Really gotta cut it out. I like to take a hot wedge of cornbread and then take some salted butter and really layer it on top. I like cold salted butter on the warm cornbread. And then we'll take a big old spoon of the black-eyed peas. And you can use any bean if you want to do black beans or pinto beans. Of course, for New Year's Day, we're doing black-eyed peas, but you can eat beans and cornbread with any kind of beans. And we'll spoon that in there, and you can see the gravy and the beans, that's the pot liquor. And so then you have a warm piece of cornbread and your nice beans that are warm and toasty for this time of year, and the butter is already starting to melt onto the cornbread. And now it's time for a taste test. So we'll take a little bit of cornbread that has some butter on it, and a little bit of beans. It's super hot. I don't want to burn my tongue. It's so good. This makes me feel like I'm right at home with my grandmother when she would make this meal for us on New Year's Day. I love the different flavors in the beans. So it's the salt and the vinegar really add all the different flavors that are in there. So the freshness of the celery and savoriness of the onion and the bacon. And then the beans are nice and they have a good tender to them, but a little bit of chew, so they're not mushy. And then of course the silky buttery part of, or the silkiness of the butter on top of the cornbread. And it's fluffy on the inside but crunchy on the outside. I hope you give this recipe a try this New Year's Day. Happy holidays. Thanks for watching today. I wish you a happy new year and that 2021 is an excellent year full of health and prosperity for you and your family. If you liked today's episode, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. We post new content every week. And until next time, cook great food in your kitchen, pass it around the table, and we'll see you soon.